I think we're starting to record. Looks like it's kicked in. Hi, so this is Steve Kenny. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself and talk about what you do a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, Steve Kenny. So I work for a large security technology manufacturing company called Axis Communications. So for, I guess, the last 7 or 8 years, I've traditionally focused on security technologies, but from a physical security or an electronic security background. But with the sort of the global market trends around sort of cybersecurity and privacy in those areas, um, there's a convergence of security, and it's been really important that we address those issues. So I've specifically focused on sort of how I can support governments, how I can support users, making sure that they both stay compliant and I guess stay safe. Really, that's the whole aim of what I've been doing for the last number of years. It's just people keeping safe and maintaining their privacy and security.
Yeah. So, right, in what I do, I can't remember the exact quote. It's something like computer science is as much about computers as, I can't remember the remainder of that particular phrase, but what I'm coming on to ask you is, we talk about cybersecurity. Is it always about the actual physical device, or can it be as much about the person using it? We hear about social engineering attacks and things like this.
So I think device security is absolutely the minimum. It is the bare minimum that any technology provider should consider. And coming from that space myself, it is absolutely what needs addressing. But if we're being brutally honest, I think we as humans, we're the weak link. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I think everyone understands that analogy. And the reality of the situation is it's our behaviours that can impact the integrity of the company that we work for. I think people report anything between 80 to 90% of cyber attacks are due to human error, unfortunately. So yeah, no matter how secure the piece of technology is, if you don't implement those security features, the
You're
risk's still there.
Yeah, and do you think at the moment with the unprecedented amount of people working from home, working remotely, and in some cases people who some people are very used to, very au fait with working from home. I mean, do you think that poses quite a risk, to both IP of a company, privacy, security, for want of a better word, the whole umbrella of keeping things safe?
Yeah, so what? Yeah, the whole working dynamics across the globe have changed. So traditionally we were bums in seats, sat in offices. A lot of businesses and a lot of individuals like myself are used to working from home. So understand some of the sort of security implications of working from home and what is good cyber hygiene. But for a lot of people, they've spent a lot of time working at an office. So the IT policies and governance that is in place for on-prem is completely different from working at home. Um, Even to the extent now that what we've got to be mindful is we're in isolation, and I guess the bad guys, so those that are looking at cyber attacks, you know, you, the grim reality is you can be in isolation but still carry out cybercrime. The reality is they do sit at home, probably as we are dressed today, committing crime. And it does come across as a bit of a faceless crime a lot of the time. So we've even seen there is a number of increases that we're seeing communication out of government at the moment. For the first time, I think it's the first time we've seen a joint statement or advisory notification come out of the UK and the US from the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre and their equivalent in the US, talking around how their monitoring of the situation is seeing a huge number of COVID-19 related sort of spamming emails, spamming attacks on both individuals and businesses, because people are working from home and we're feeling quite vulnerable at the moment. So I guess our spider senses aren't what they used to be.
Yeah.
And when we need to be as vigilant as possible because of the environment that we're in at the moment, we're probably quite disorientated. Working situations have changed, and and this is posing both a threat to us individually in our businesses, but a really big opportunity for cyber criminals.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, you'd assume that most businesses and most organisations have kind of, should we say, locked down their, I suppose, did you call it the device physical sort of security? You know, the hardware infrastructure. I mean, if they haven't, obviously, there's one strand of things that needs to be looked at for people. But I suppose there's the investment in people, isn't there? Really, there's two ways of looking at security.
It's actually both. So when it's business as usual and we are operating, obviously a lot of businesses will close down and make the technologies that they're operating with incredibly secure. They take people working remotely. What we're actually starting to see is people open up systems, enable people to work from home. So rather than this sort of closed nature of locking systems down, what they're doing is they're enabling remote access into their corporate networks, into systems, so they can actually allow their staff to work from home. So that is, again, adding an element of risk. So if businesses don't have things like firewalls in place and they start opening up their network so their staff can remotely access the information, that's just adding unnecessary risk into their site.
And it's, I mean, the definition of security is, I suppose, I mean, you'll say it in a much more eloquent way than this, but it's trying to make things more of a hassle, isn't it, for people to gain access that shouldn't be gaining access to any system? Because surely nothing can be completely locked down, otherwise no one could. I mean, am I wrong in that? Or?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. What you've got to think about it is if you're being chased by a lion, as long as you're the second slowest, you're going to get away. If you look at it from a cyber attack, as long as you are more secure than somebody else, you're probably less likely of being the one that's attacked. The number of, I guess, when we watch Hollywood films and we see these big cyber security attacks, they're really sophisticated. You know, you see people breaking into sites, all of these things, and the reality of it is the majority of the breaches that we see, they're not sophisticated attacks. They're just opportunistic sort of events that people go, oh, I can get into that system, or I can do this. And it isn't this elaborate, sophisticated attack. I'm not saying they don't happen, because they absolutely do happen. But the reality of it is, as long as you're the second slowest, you're probably going to get away from that lion.
That's a really good way of putting it. So as long as you're not running Windows 98 on a non-firewall connection, you're gonna be all right-ish to a point. So is it things like for the normal person keeping up to date with the OS and patching and stuff like that, if it's on an IT basis? Or
it is absolutely one of the main things of consideration. If you are running any sort of software in your systems, make sure that you've got up-to-date software. Make sure that you've run any updates and your patches, because those patches, as much as they may feel like a bit of an inconvenience, the reality is they're probably fixing any vulnerabilities that you've got in the system. One of the most high-profile ones that I guess we've seen across the UK was WannaCry, when it essentially brought the NHS to an absolute standstill. And that was, 3 years ago. It's reported it cost 20 million on the day to get it back up and running, get it back on its feet. And subsequently, the costs have just rocketed. So it's just shy of £100 million to get the NHS's systems up and running again. And what was that malware attack? It was on out-of-date software.
Yeah. and that doesn't, I suppose it costs money for a person, organisation, business, in the sense they have to spend time. There might be a bit of downtime, but it doesn't really cost the earth to just keep that going. And I appreciate some setups, for whatever legacy reason, have to keep old software. But I suppose you just need to be aware, mitigate that risk, keep that device, because we're not necessarily talking about just computers here. We have Internet of Things, devices connected to the web that also are kind of mini computers, aren't they?
Absolutely.
If there's anything that you can't update, kind of maybe isolate it a little bit potentially, so it's not as big of a surface.
Yes. So what when we go into the Internet of Things space, if you look at this sort of attack vectors, they've gone from within buildings to outside of buildings. And the one thing that I've spoken around for probably a number of years now is the value of supply chain due diligence. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
Right.
Essentially, we need to look at the companies that we're working with, and as you say, it's like, what is their strategy to do firmware updates? How are they documenting and committing to the consumers, us, that if someone finds a vulnerability, how are they going to fix that vulnerability? How are they going to notify us of that vulnerability? Because ultimately, the technologies that we're using today, they might be secure today, but they might be insecure tomorrow because
Yeah.
somebody finds something. Um, and it is big, credible organizations will document how they're going to fix these problems. Microsoft being a shining example. If you looked at the number of potential bugs and vulnerabilities that Microsoft had, no one had ever used them. But the reality of it is, because they're such a big organization, in a very pro way, they proactively identify issues and they fix them and they tell people how to
Yeah.
fix them.
Yeah.
And that is a good example of what businesses need to do.
So kind of like that, almost like a greenhouse approach to problems is, I suppose what you're saying is some people might consider a weakness, but in actual fact a strength because it shows they're open and honest about the fact they have problems and they're going to try and fix them.
Yeah, yeah. I,
Whereas, I mean, God, I remember years ago, I bought myself a little IP camera, which I stuck on my home network, and it was great. But then I realised, in actual fact, the admin password to it was hard coded. You can't change it. I mean, that must mean they're incredibly easy to hack, you know.
yeah,
So, and like you said, there's probably a whole raft of these devices, whatever devices you might want to call it, cameras, whatever connected to the internet. I mean, washing machines, fridges, all this sort of stuff. That can represent a potentially a problem, isn't it? Really?
yeah. There is so there is some initiatives that have come out of the UK around things like that, called secure by default.
Right.
So
Okay.
essentially, it's looking at how a technology interacts out of box. So if you look at your iPhone or you look at your Android, whatever phone that may be, it takes you on a bit of a journey as soon as you switch it on. So it is around updating passwords. It'll check to make sure it's got the latest firmware when you've connected it to the Wi-Fi. So you go through a process. You don't even realize you're doing it, but it takes you through an automated process of adding layers of security to it and making sure. Now, to try and bring that into the sort of the technology world, there's organisations like the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, and they talk around secure by default. And you just referenced where you had an IP camera mounted to your house. Now, that is an example of something that has been stopped now for government procurement. So the
Oh, really?
UK's Surveillance Camera Commissioner last year brought out some legislation or some certification and some policies around secure by design, secure by default, which essentially stresses the importance of it cannot have hard-coded passwords in, because if you go online and you know what websites to look on, you will find
Lists
camera
and lists of,
feeds.
yeah.
Yeah, camera feeds that are showing people's driveways. You will find camera feeds that are going to be publicly available. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the camera shouldn't do that, but the purpose of the camera is it's been designed to do that. And all that's made that is an issue is someone's not gone through a process of hardening that device onto the network. So someone's not disconnected its remote accessibility. Someone's not, so they've not gone through the process of stopping that or preventing that from happening.
Yeah.
Secure by default, basically out of box, means that won't happen. If you want that to happen, you now need to enable certain functions and features.
Yeah.
So it sort of flipped that installation commissioning on its head now. So it's turned it around. So if you want stuff to happen, you have to do it rather than it doing it naturally.
Yeah. Because most people's attitude to technology is get out of the box, get it working, and then, oh, brilliant, sorted, isn't it really?
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of that myself. And I'm to a point in IT, and it's really, especially if you've got someone who probably have struggled to set things up. And some companies, I mean, you're probably dealing with large multinationals, and they've got a really kick-ass IT team, and they've thought about security from the start, and they've done their due diligence. But I mean, still things are going to get through. But when you think about the smaller businesses, maybe perhaps they haven't got an IT department, or it's very sparse, or maybe it's a multi-role kind of deal and it's not their specialism. It's not easy to get right, is it, really? You know, because there's a lot of things to consider.
It, Absolutely. When we think in the UK, 96% of all but registered businesses on Companies House are classed as a small to medium enterprise. So they're not these big multinationals. Now, as you referenced there, the bigger the organisation, the more likely they are to have, information security policies, people that sit in positions to prevent or at least work within that environment. If you're a small to medium business, how do you have a cybersecurity expert?
No,
You don't. Yeah, you absolutely don't. Yeah, they are 50% or just under 50% of all cyber attacks are aimed at small to medium sized businesses. So it's a massive number. But and also if a big ugly organization gets attacked, then they've got things in place to sort of revert back to business as usual. A lot of the smaller businesses, if they get hacked or a ransomware or they have to pay things to get back to business, a lot of these organizations, they unfortunately, the sad consequences, they may go bust within 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, I do IT training, but aside from that, I do small amounts of consultancy building small systems. And one of my customers, you mentioned WannaCry, one of my customers years ago was affected by that. And they had backups, they weren't checked, they come to restore, and, they couldn't get all of the data back. Obviously, they're not going to pay up because it's a Swiss. They're not going to end up actually getting anything back. So yeah, it can be devastating, absolutely devastating, that sort of thing. So with that in mind, I suppose really when we're saying the amount of businesses that might not have a policy, a plan, procedures in place to help themselves. I mean, you're probably talking the equivalent of maybe, I don't know, 20 big PLC companies in the UK in terms of what it contributes to the UK economy. Are there any resources or any guidance, anything that could help that sector, not completely blanket for everything, but would help them improve? Something that's available from government, or I don't know, the industries maybe publish something, or
Yeah, so there's there's an organisation that has just joined forces. So there's an organisation called Secured by Design. Now that traditionally looked at physical security for sort of home, residential, small business type applications. Now they've just joined forces with what used to be known as the London Digital Security Centre, which is actually a global, which is actually a national initiative. So it is part funded by the police. The London Digital Security Centre had a solid focus on cybersecurity for small to medium enterprises. They do lots of WebExes, they do lots of classroom-based training, and it is just all a focus around. It's very thought-provoking, but it's around the education of what small businesses should be doing. You referenced that some of the businesses that you've worked with in your consultancy considering a backup plan. Now that's got to be one of the biggest things that any business should do. When we look individually, how devastated are we individually if we lose some family photos?
Oh yeah.
Because they're memories that you might not get back. But if you look at a small business, or you look at any business really, now if they've not done a backup for, I'm going to say optimistically a month. Now, I know that there's probably a lot of businesses that haven't done a backup in a year, but imagine they lost access to their servers and they lost access to all of the configuration files that essentially runs their business.
Oh yeah.
It's absolutely devastating implications. So that's one of the things that businesses absolutely need to do is the backups, and these are sort of the things that they're trying to educate businesses on. It's just saying to that small business, so that is the central location for all of your customer data, your accounting data, all of your operational business type data. what happens if you lose that server? It might not even be to a hack. It might be that the server hasn't backed up and it's lost power, and it's had, a functional sort of error of some description. What is the
Yeah.
impact to your businesses?
Yeah.
And that's what it's there to do. It's there to try and stimulate people's awareness around sort of the consequences of not getting good cyber hygiene right, but also, what does bad look like, and how are you going to recover from bad?
Yeah. So do you know what I've picked up on? You've mentioned cyber hygiene probably twice or three times. I have to
Yeah.
I can guess what I think it means, but can you explain what cyber hygiene means?
It's just it's just I guess, what does good look like? It's just sort of both a mental process that people may go through, and it might, and it's just that awareness around your environment and your space to make sure that actually what you're doing does it from a cybersecurity point. It is good practice. Now, like things that are built into, I would say, cyber hygiene is, I know it sounds crazy, but we talk around passwords and
Yeah.
the importance of passwords and strong passwords and not retaining default username and passwords. Now, the fact that we're on Zoom at the moment isn't like the the irony of it isn't lost on me, but it's the importance of actually you can have things that are not necessarily the most secure, but you can make them secure. But if you look at what happened to Yahoo a number of years ago, where they lost millions of
Oh yeah.
customers and unique usernames and passwords. Now, how many of those Yahoo username and password isn't duplicated on lots and lots and lots of different logins for internet banking,
Oh yeah.
utilities,
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
banking, and how many people have had the same password for years? Now,
Oh
that
God. Yeah.
is, yeah, that is not good cyber hygiene. That's bad cyber hygiene. So it's the if you have a Yahoo, a Gmail, a Hotmail, any of these, good cyber hygiene is making that a unique password as the bare
Yeah.
minimum. You should have unique passwords for all of your system. That's fine, but I know that if you've got 20 different sort of logins required, just make that what is probably going to be the weakest, make that one completely unique. And that's things like good cyber hygiene. If we're looking at businesses today, it's, so what else should we consider doing? Obviously, we've mentioned the importance of backing up all the important systems that we've got, and doing that fairly regularly. You can automate it, that's not an issue. But if we've got lots and lots of staff that are working remotely now, that aren't used to working remotely, we can put things in place that we need to consider. So if they're working remotely, let's have a VPN, so a virtual private network, that's going to get us into our network, but it's going to get us into the network securely. And then if people are starting to actually click on systems within that network, let's try and run some form of multi-factor authentication. So my employer knows my mobile phone number. They provide me with that. So if I want to log into our system online and I've gone through our VPN, it will send me a notification with a code to my mobile device that I have to then put in. So basically, it's now not just the integrity, the physical integrity of my laptop. It's now I'm going through different areas of authentication. So have I lost my laptop? Have I lost my laptop on my mobile phone? So there's lots of additional ways of adding layers of security onto that. That's good cyber hygiene. Um, we're just protecting the networks in a stronger way.
So I suppose, I mean, how you just put that is quite interesting, actually. It's because in how you say that, you say it's not just the integrity of my computer, it's not just my mobile phone, it's both of them. Because in that statement, you're kind of saying, well, actually, neither of them are perfect, but together they're stronger because you have one that
Absolutely.
verifies the other. And you know, I mean, you have years and years and years and years of experience in the security industry, and you talk to people about what your company offers, and you talk about trends in the industry, and but you're even you're sort of saying, well, nothing's perfect, so we're just going to try and do as much as possible to put barriers in the way to make it harder for people, really, aren't we? And I suppose that's when they talk about two-factor, multi-factor authentication, that kind of thing, isn't it? It's just putting barriers in the way, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it
And
is. Yeah, yeah. It's if we think about any criminal in the world, they are going to take the path of least resistance.
yeah, yes,
So by putting these additional layers of security in place and make it harder, if we look at a password, if a password takes an hour to crack or a password takes a year to crack through some automated cracking tool, which one are they going to do?
the hour easily. So we're not really talking
Yeah,
about the film Swordfish, are we? We're talking more
no,
about
we're not.
how you put it. Was it be the second fattest lad at the back? you know,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
and that's the harsh reality of it. It, they are going to go for the path of least resistance, and if they find opportunities, they will absolutely take them.
Yeah, yeah,
And
no, definitely.
and a business being falling foul of a cyber attack, what does that look like? Is it the loss of intellectual property, as you mentioned? Is it the loss of your accounting data? Is it the loss of your customer data? And when we start to look at the loss of your customer data, does that now have the GDPR implications, or in the UK
Oh
Data
yeah,
Protection Act 2018? So these are just things that we need to be mindful of now. That sometimes we've got the damage to the brand, we've got damage to a share price if it's a large organisation, we've got loss of revenues, and now we've got the added uh, benefit of potential GDPR fines as well.
yeah.
So
So do you know? It's interesting you mentioned that. So we've kind of fallen into this conversation of talking about security, physical barriers, how to mitigate that. And we've kind of not completely focused on technology. We've kind of focused a little bit on the human factor of technology and keeping things
yeah,
secure. What's your perspective on privacy when it comes to working from home? Because I mean, we're effectively, I mean, I don't really do anything that's particularly that important to keep massively private. So it doesn't really matter who's around me when I'm doing my work or on phone calls. But you're getting a whole raft of people who might be doing stuff that's commercially sensitive or more, they work in government or whatever,
yeah.
and taking them out of like a nice little box of an office, dropping them into their house. I mean, walk my daughter around the green. I've seen people on the phones having business conversations. I'm guilty of doing it as well. It's a different attitude. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's so that's it, so the security and privacy, they do work hand in hand, but they do work in isolation. So
Yeah,
sometimes businesses that are secure with your data doesn't necessarily mean it embraces the privacy of your data.
no, not at
Um,
all. No.
but when we think around the fact that we can have commercially sensitive conversations, we've seen it in the press where people will go, they'll jump on a train, they'll leave their laptop open and they'll go and get a coffee, and they come back and then they're like, their emails have been open to the public. Now, all a business can try and do in these situations is create that awareness and educate people around why it's so important not to do those things. Having worked in the security industry now for a number of years, 15, 16 years, I think it is, I think naturally, I think people that work in the security industry are a little more aware of the conversations that they have within public, the type of information that they share, and their vigilance is probably a little higher than people that aren't traditionally working from home or don't work within the security sector. The only thing businesses can try and do is educate people on why it's important, because it is really difficult to enforce don't speak about this subject on the phone when in public, because you've just got to have that element of trust that your employees understand the implications of those conversations in public.
Yeah,
I'll give people a benefit of the doubt. I think if most people are having commercially sensitive conversations, I'd like to think they're doing them in a secure environment. There definitely seems to be a little more flexibility with people walking around in the background of conference calls.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But again, it's just a the working dynamics have changed now. I think people are a little bit more sympathetic to children running around as
oh yeah, yeah,
partners and children are at home as well. So home life has been turned on its head just as much as working life. But again, if you're sat in an office and you've got certain information scribbled on a whiteboard that's sat behind you, be
yeah,
mindful of who you're speaking to.
yeah,
Um, and and yeah, the human aspect of cybersecurity is the one that is probably the easiest to address, potentially the biggest risk as well. So it's the only thing I can is it's about education. If people individually know that I am putting my business at risk, because that's what I think. A lot of people are blissfully unaware that their actions can put both themselves and their business at risk. When they know that, and they can go through their own mental due diligence of what am I doing, why am I doing it, their spidey senses are sort of triggering when
yeah,
that
yeah,
email from Steve comes in, but it doesn't look like an email that I get from Steve. So it's actually let's be a little less trusting when we're online, more
yeah.
rather than more trusting.
Do you think so? If someone, so let's say I'm at home, but I'm working from home, and I've worked from home for years. I get an email, looks a little bit sus. Maybe it's asking me questions that, why are you asking me these questions? I'm probably going to be a bit more vigilant, look at where it's come from, look at what it's asking, be a bit more aware about how I answer it, what I do with it. If you then take off the work hat, where and not
Yep.
everyone's used to having this work hat on at home, first of all, because obviously people are a bit more relaxed when they work from home, kids talking to them, they've maybe done Joe Wicks in the morning, all this kind of stuff. But if you take your work hat off, and then move your thinking to social media, and you've
Yep.
got those quizzes. Tell me 5 things about you that I wouldn't know about you if you didn't tell me, or what's your favorite color, or fill these 15 or 20 questions in. I mean, is that kind of a way of gaining people's thought process behind putting the passwords together, stuff like that? Is this just another way of hacking a person, shall we say, rather than a
It,
a
so
device?
well, social engineering is one of the core components of cybersecurity when we look at how people find information out. And I think phishing emails equate to something crazy like 80% of all emails sent globally. But when you've got sort of spear phishing, so this is where people are targeting Steve Kenny. What they will do is they'll go through some form of reconnaissance on me, so they'll want to identify all the key information. So if they are starting to build a rapport with me,
Right. Okay.
and it is asking those questions. Now, I have an open LinkedIn profile for business purposes, so you can tell where I've worked, who my colleagues are, how long I've worked there. I do tend to lock down certain information. I don't really have a personal social media account with Facebook. There is one there, but it's not something I use. When you start to think of the level of information that we push into a public domain, that we share with the wider world, this is just an opportunity that people will use to actually collate lots of good information. So, hi Ben, yeah, how's your holiday 2 weeks ago to wherever that may be? Instantly you're thinking, oh, this person must know me. Have I spoken to them? When the reality of it is they're targeting you as an individual. They've gone on your Facebook profile and they've seen you've been on holiday with your wife and your child, and they start to build this comfort blanket through communication. And then that's when you lower your guard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. People like people, don't they? If someone's friendly
Yeah.
conversation.
Well, culturally, especially because working across the globe, I do know that culturally we're different in the UK to some countries, and we are very trusting and we're very patient. So it's just being aware. is it Myers-Briggs, the sort of profile building? Have you ever come across that?
No.
Where you do like, so it's basically where a lot of employers will do some form of like psychometric test, and it'll build a profile of you. So you answer lots of questions, and it'll tell.
Oh, yeah, I know
It'll
what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, there are organisations that can take your profile and overlay it with the profile of somebody that is likely to fall foul of social engineering or cyber attacks,
Oh, wow.
because if you are more trusting, if you are more engaging, if you like to be the center of attention, all of these things will make you more inclined to click on that email, or will make you more inclined to engage with people that you don't ordinarily engage with.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
if you're quite closed and you're quite reserved and you're quite sort of, you're quite analytical, then you are more inclined to be distrusting, less trusting. Yeah, distrusting.
Think why, I
Yeah,
suppose, isn't it? Really?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I know what you mean. So with your, so you've, as we've talked, you've alluded to the fact that, in the security industry, people are a bit more aware and sort of know the risks. I mean, you haven't said we've got ninja skills, but kind of, when it comes to sort of keeping yourself secure, information private. Are there any piece of advice you could give? Anything that, during your time in the industry, any kind of training that you've had access to, or resources, anything that would help someone who hasn't had the benefit of that kind of, mindset being imprinted on them because they've done something different, just to wrap us up a little bit?
So I would absolutely go and have a little look at some of the material that's provided by the UK's National Cyber Security Centre. So that is both there for businesses, and it is also there for individuals. And it gives some really good recommendations around some of the key tools that we need to put in place. It just There's lots of different online training courses as well, and it is around awareness. I think that's the key thing. If people understand the threat that they individually face and the implications to their business, naturally people are more considerate when they start to do things, rather than being blissfully unaware that actually I'm being targeted. From a business point of view, there's lots of support out there, and the policing security centre is one that needs to be considered. I'm not sure if you can put a link out to that. That's
Yeah.
ideal for
Any
small to
resources or
medium.
links you've got,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
and because there's lots of sort of online information that we can get. We can send out a link with at the end of the video, that's got lots of different websites that are good pools of information. But I think that I guess if I was to give a sort of a handful of pieces just for people to consider, is just have a little look at the passwords that you've used across all your different logins, and check whether or not you think they're secure or not. There's lots of websites that have been compromised, so now is probably a good time to go and change passwords and get a password manager. If you are remotely working and your business can, start to use VPNs, use multi-factor authentication. Absolutely back up business data, because that is critical. If you are a small business and you don't have a firewall, get a firewall.
Yeah.
And the last one is, and there's some really, really good ones out there, and you've got organizations like McAfee that will do it all. Get a spam filter, because actually if you can filter out the known perpetrators when it comes to spamming organizations, you can minimize the risk to your employees clicking on emails that will pose a big risk to the business.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So you're kind of looking to stop people from hacking devices and the people, and putting things again. Going back to what we said earlier on, you, rather than like just saying do this one thing, you've listed out 4-5 separate things, because it's all of those things together that are going to protect, aren't they? Really, it's a multi-angle approach, isn't it? Really, to make sure that you're fairly safe, to stop you from being the slowest, person at the back, as you put it, and staying safe, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and just be vigilant. Be a little less trusting.
Great.
Yeah. Well, if it's online, just be a little less trusting.
Yeah. No, it's true.
If it
Though.
sounds too good, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. If you've not been to Spain, you've not won the Spanish lottery. It's as simple as that.
That is, do you know what? I think that's if I have to title the video, that's a great title. If you've not won the Spanish lottery, sorry, if you've not been to, listen to me, if you've not been to Spain, you've not won the Spanish lottery. There you go. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. So look, Steve, thank you very much for talking to me. I really appreciate that. We'll get some resources and links from Steve, and I'll put them in a place so you can all get access to them and benefit from Steve's advice. But yeah, thank you very much for talking to me, Steve. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. It's been great.
Cheers.